Okay, cool. All right. So number three is number three pitfall is a lack of really adequate discovery around, and we're not talking about due diligence discovery, but assuming this is sort of post transaction, there's oftentimes a lack of adequate discovery around what's really going to be involved in bringing these two businesses together, which basically leads to underestimating the amount of work that's involved with a merger. And it's human nature to be like, oh, this isn't going to be too hard, right? This is going to be easy. Our businesses are very similar, or the business that we're acquiring is pretty small, or whatever the case may be. It's easy to underestimate, particularly from a leadership standpoint. It's easy to underestimate the amount of work that actually has to go into to making this happen. And as we mentioned, right, there's impacts across the board. There's impacts to customers, to contracts, to reporting, to systems, to processes, to obviously people and so forth. And we need to be thinking about, so what does this mean? Here's a few areas to think about as you sort of consider areas where you need to dig a little bit deeper in order to really get a handle on how much work is involved. So your go-to-market models, you just mentioned that a minute ago, Susan. What about existing customers? What about renewals and contractual obligations that we have? How are we going to deal with those? What about our licensing models? What about changes that we may want to make as we bring the two businesses together? How about the product catalogs, right? How are we going to enable both sales teams to sell each other's products, if that's part of the solution? What about data migration, right? How are we going to move and combine data sets between the two organizations? How about business processes? What are we going to, how are we going to, and we'll spend a little more time on this in just a minute, but how are we going to bring together two potentially very disparate business processes across the go-to-market process and financial process and so forth? And then of course, the topic that's near and dear to OpFocus's heart is what about the systems, right? And the tech stack and interoperability and integrations and so forth. So one thing that we found very helpful as far as really understanding and assessing the sort of the size and the effort involved is to as soon as you can get the various teams from both acquired and acquiring businesses together to really begin doing some exploratory work. So having some dialogues around, here's a day in the life of our salespeople. Here's a day in the life of our salespeople, right? And kind of compare notes. What about how do your BDRs function? What does your lead life cycle look like? What does your quoting process look like? Let's compare contracts and really spend some good time learning about the other side's way of doing business before you try to finalize a plan to go and bring the two companies together. Susan, looks like you want to say something. Go for it.
Oh my gosh, I always want to say something, Jim. You're absolutely right. And I would say the best success that we've had is not just in building the rapport and discoveries in the day in life and the leadership team from the people who are involved in the integration. That's going, that's where you start. And that's really important. But really listen to what the other parties are saying and try to figure out who are those key players, who are the individuals that they keep mentioning manage this process or that process. Is it Joe Schmo over here and he's got something that's going on? Find out these key individuals in the organization and build a relationship with them, because more than not, they are the people that maybe people are looking to. Maybe they have some manual craft that they're doing in the organization, but you want to find out where your influencers are in building this plan, but also later in rolling out whatever the net new thing will be, that model, that adoption. At the same time, we tend to stay away from the detractors. Maybe it's a noisy salesperson. Maybe it's a really loud marketer and they're just, arm's distance away. Figure out how to break into it. We've had great examples, well, painful examples, Jim, of, rolling out and iterating on sales processes, kind of merging many brands into one sales process. And we spent hours looking at the plan, building the sales process, engaging, launching, only to hear the noise bubble from inside, all the way up to leadership. And we really couldn't figure out what was the actual cause. And when we figure out who the detractors were and sat with them quietly and helped them to understand our perspective, but also to hear their perspective, it was so interesting. They became the #1 partner to every change motion we had. Every sales rollout, new implementation, playbook, they were right there, and they were a force multiplier in building it.
Yeah, well, you did a great job of turning many of those detractors into champions and advocates. So
the trampoline I brought into the office.
one of your gifts. So yeah, so I think the key takeaways here are, don't underestimate, right? Build into your integration plan at sufficient time for the teams to understand each other and their business processes, and to really understand all viewpoints, including those detractors, like you said, Susan. So they have a really important viewpoint to share.